Think about the smartphone in your pocket right now. 20 years ago, it didn't exist in any meaningful form. 40 years ago, the very idea would have seemed like science fiction. Yet today, it's so integrated into our lives that leaving home without it feels almost like forgetting to put on shoes. This is innovation in action, and it's been happening in waves throughout human history, each one more powerful than the last. What I want to explore with you today is one of the most fascinating concepts in economic history: innovation patterns and the cycle of creative destruction. This isn't just abstract theory. Understanding these patterns helps us make sense of why some companies thrive while others vanish, why entire industries can seemingly disappear overnight, and most importantly, what's happening right now in our world. Let me start with a name you need to know: Joseph Schumpeter. This Austrian economist, writing in the early 20th century, came up with a term that perfectly captures how capitalism actually works: creative destruction. Now, that sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? How can destruction be creative? But Schumpeter understood something profound. He saw that innovation doesn't just add new things to the economy. It fundamentally tears down old structures and replaces them with new ones. It's not gentle. It's not gradual. It's revolutionary. Here's what Schumpeter wrote in his groundbreaking book, published back in 1942. Capitalism is a form of economic change that never stands still. The fundamental force driving capitalism forward comes from new consumer goods, new production methods, new markets, and new forms of industrial organization. These innovations continually revolutionize economic structures from within, destroying old systems and creating new ones. That's the essence of capitalism, according to Schumpeter. Not steady growth, not equilibrium, but this constant, turbulent process of renewal through destruction. Think about what that means for a second. Every major innovation in history has left casualties in its wake. When the steam engine revolutionized manufacturing, it didn't just create new factories. It destroyed the cottage industry system that had employed people for generations. When automobiles transformed transportation, they didn't just add a new option for getting around. They obliterated the horse and buggy industry, throwing blacksmiths and stable workers out of jobs. When digital photography emerged, Kodak, a company that had dominated film photography for over a century, filed for bankruptcy. But here's the paradox that makes this so interesting. This destruction is precisely what drives progress forward. Those automobile workers who replaced the blacksmiths, they earned higher wages and produced more value. The digital photographers who replaced film developers, they created an explosion of creative expression that was impossible in the analog age. Creative destruction raises living standards over time, even though it causes real pain to real people in the short term. Now, let's dig deeper into how innovation actually unfolds throughout history. This is where it gets really fascinating. Innovation doesn't happen It comes in waves, in clusters, in what Schumpeter called swarms. You get periods where multiple breakthrough innovations emerge almost simultaneously, feeding off each other, creating cascading effects throughout the economy. Then you get periods of relative calm, where the economy absorbs and refines these innovations before the next wave hits. Let me walk you through the major waves of innovation that have shaped the modern world. Understanding these waves is like having a map of economic history. The first wave started around 1785 and ran through the early 19th century. This was the age of water power, textiles, and iron. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain, and it fundamentally changed human civilization. Before this period, most people lived on farms, made things by hand, and rarely traveled more than a few miles from where they were born. The introduction of mechanized textile production, powered by water wheels and later steam engines, created the first factories. Suddenly, you could produce cloth at a scale and speed that was unimaginable before. But the textile industry wasn't alone. Iron production advanced dramatically. New techniques, like the use of coke instead of charcoal, allowed Britain to produce iron at unprecedented quantities and qualities. This iron fueled the next wave of innovation. You couldn't build steam engines, railways, or bridges without it. The innovations clustered together, each one enabling the next. The second wave, running from roughly 1845 to 1900, was the age of steam power and railways. This one reshaped the physical landscape of the world. Railways connected cities, opened up interior regions, and created entirely new patterns of settlement and trade. Steam power wasn't limited to trains. It powered factories, ships, and eventually a vast array of industrial machinery. The railway industry itself became one of the world's largest industries, employing millions of people and driving demand for steel, coal, labor, and engineering expertise. Here's something interesting about this period. At one point in the 1920s, there were over 260 automobile manufacturers in the United States alone. Think about that. Today, we have maybe a dozen major car companies globally, but back then, in just one country, there were hundreds. Most of them failed, of course. That's creative destruction at work. The market ruthlessly sorted winners from losers, and only the most efficient, innovative companies survived. Ford Motor Company didn't just make cars, it revolutionized manufacturing itself with the assembly line, a process innovation that transformed every industry it touched. The third wave, from roughly 1900 to 1950, brought electricity and chemicals. Now, electricity is one of those general-purpose technologies that changes everything. When factories switched from steam power to electric motors, they didn't just swap one power source for another. Electricity allowed completely new factory layouts, new production techniques, and new products. You could put a motor anywhere. You could light up workplaces and homes. You could power communication systems. The ripple effects were extraordinary. Chemical innovations during this period transformed agriculture, medicine, manufacturing, and everyday life. Synthetic dyes revolutionized the textile industry. Fertilizers dramatically increased crop yields. Plastics created entirely new categories of products. Germany became the world leader in industrial chemistry during this period, building a knowledge base that would influence global industry for generations. The fourth wave, from around 1950 to 1990, was the era of petrochemicals, electronics, and aviation. This wave gave us the modern consumer society. Petrochemical products, from plastics to synthetic fibers, became ubiquitous. Electronics evolved from bulky vacuum tubes to compact transistors to integrated circuits. Aviation transformed from a novelty to an essential element of global business and personal travel. But more importantly, this wave laid the groundwork for what came. The development of the transistor at Bell Labs in 1947, for instance, was one of the most consequential innovations in human history. It enabled the miniaturization of electronics, which eventually led to personal computers, mobile phones, and the digital revolution that defines our current era. The fifth wave, starting in the 1990s, was dominated by digital networks, software, and biotechnology. The internet changed everything about how we communicate, do business, learn, and entertain ourselves. Think about what happened. Entire industries were either created or destroyed within a single decade. Newspapers, music companies, bookstores, video rental chains, travel agencies, all of these industries were fundamentally disrupted by digital technology. Meanwhile, completely new categories of business emerged: search engines, social networks, e-commerce, platforms, streaming services. What's remarkable about this wave is the speed of change. Previous innovation waves unfolded over 50 or 60 years. This one compressed massive transformation into perhaps 20 years. The pace of creative destruction accelerated dramatically. Companies that seemed invincible, like Nokia in mobile phones or BlackBerry in smartphones, collapsed within just a few years when they failed to adapt to the iPhone and Android revolution. And now we're entering what many call the sixth wave, characterized by artificial intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, and renewable energy. We're living through this transformation right now, which makes it harder to see clearly, but the patterns are similar to previous waves. AI is a general-purpose technology, just like electricity was. It's not just adding new capabilities to existing systems. It's fundamentally changing how work gets done across every sector of the economy. Autonomous vehicles could transform transportation. Machine learning is revolutionizing healthcare diagnostics. Natural language processing is changing how we interact with computers. Renewable energy and battery technology are disrupting the fossil fuel industry. The Internet of Things is connecting billions of devices. Each of these innovations reinforces the others, creating that Schumpeterian swarm effect. Now, let me explain why innovations tend to come in clusters rather than at a steady pace. This is one of Schumpeter's most important insights. Innovation often requires complementary innovations before it can succeed. You couldn't have railways without advances in steel production and civil engineering. You couldn't have the internet without personal computers, telecommunications infrastructure, and software development tools. So innovations tend to wait for each other, creating bottlenecks until multiple breakthroughs happen in quick succession. There's also an economic dimension to this clustering. During economic boom times, credit is readily available, investors are optimistic, and companies are willing to take risks on new ventures. This creates favorable conditions for entrepreneurship and innovation. Schumpeter emphasized the role of the banking system in providing entrepreneurs with the capital they need to commercialize their innovations. When that credit dries up during recessions, innovation activity tends to slow down, at least temporarily. Then there's the spillover effect. When one company in an industry innovates successfully, it creates both opportunities and pressures for other companies. The opportunities come from suppliers, complementary products, and adjacent markets. The pressures come from competition. If you don't innovate to keep up, you'll lose market share or go out of business entirely. This creates cascades of innovation within and across industries. Let's talk about what happens to industries and companies during these waves of creative destruction. The pattern is remarkably consistent across different eras and technologies. When a new wave begins, you typically see an explosion of new entrants. Hundreds of companies rush into promising new fields. Most of them will fail, but during the early chaotic phase, it's not clear who the winners will be. Gradually, the industry consolidates. Some companies prove more efficient, better capitalized, or luckier than others. They gain market share, establish brands, build distribution networks, and develop economies of scale. The number of competitors shrinks dramatically. This consolidation phase can last for decades. Think about the automobile industry, which went from hundreds of manufacturers to perhaps a dozen dominant global companies over the course of half a century. But here's where it gets interesting. The dominant companies from one wave are often not the dominant companies of the next wave. Established firms have tremendous advantages in terms of resources, expertise, and market position, but they also face what Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen called the innovator's dilemma. The very practices that made them successful in one era can blind them to disruptive innovations in the next era. Kodak invented digital photography technology in the 1970s. They had the patents, the knowledge, and the resources, but their entire business model was built around selling film and photo paper. Digital photography threatened that core business, so they hesitated, delayed, and ultimately failed to pivot effectively. Meanwhile, companies that didn't have legacy businesses to protect, like Canon and later smartphone manufacturers, embraced digital imaging wholeheartedly. This pattern repeats constantly. IBM dominated mainframe computers, but missed the personal computer revolution, allowing Microsoft and Intel to become the new giants. Microsoft and Intel dominated personal computers, but were caught flat-footed by mobile computing, allowing Apple and Google to surge ahead. Even Apple and Google, despite their current dominance, are now scrambling to position themselves for the AI revolution, uncertain whether they'll maintain their positions in this new wave. So what determines which companies survive and thrive through these waves of creative destruction? Research on innovation patterns has identified several key factors. First, adaptability matters more than size. Large companies have advantages, but only if they remain flexible and willing to cannibalize their own products before competitors do. Companies need what scholars call dynamic capabilities, the ability to reconfigure their assets, strategies, and organizational structures in response to changing markets and technologies. Second, investment in research and development is critical, but it's not just about spending money. The organization needs to have structures that allow innovations to flourish. The famous corporate research labs of the early 20th century, like Bell Labs, General Electric Research Department, and DuPont's labs, had significant autonomy to pursue long-term projects that might not have immediate commercial applications. That freedom produced fundamental breakthroughs like the transistor and nylon. Later, as companies demanded shorter-term returns and tighter control over research agendas, the pace of radical innovation from corporate labs declined. Third, Networks and ecosystems matter tremendously. British inventors during the Industrial Revolution worked in more central positions within the innovation network than their French counterparts. They collaborated more extensively, shared knowledge more freely, and built on each other's work more effectively. This network advantage helped explain Britain's economic leadership during that era. Today, Silicon Valley's success comes partly from this same principle: dense networks of entrepreneurs, investors, engineers, and researchers who constantly interact, share ideas, and form new ventures. Fourth, timing is crucial. Being too early with an innovation can be just as fatal as being too late. The technology needs to align with market readiness, complementary innovations, regulatory environments, and social acceptance. Electric vehicles were actually invented in the late 19th century, but battery technology wasn't good enough. Oil was cheap and abundant, and the infrastructure for internal combustion engines was already being built. It took more than a century for the conditions to become favorable for electric vehicles to succeed. Let's talk about the human cost of all this creative destruction. It's easy to celebrate innovation when you're looking at aggregate economic data or standing in a technology museum, admiring historical machines. It's much harder when you're the worker whose skills become obsolete, or the business owner whose company can't compete with new entrants, or the community whose main industry collapses. Schumpeter acknowledged this tension. He understood that creative destruction creates winners and losers, and that the losers experience real hardship. Entire communities can be devastated when industries decline. Workers with specialized skills accumulated over decades can find those skills suddenly worthless. Small business owners can lose their life savings when market conditions shift. The social and political implications are profound. When large numbers of people feel left behind by economic change, they become receptive to political movements that promise to protect them, to turn back the clock, to preserve the old ways. Throughout history, we see this pattern repeatedly. The Luddites in early 19th century Britain literally smashed textile machinery because they correctly understood that mechanization threatened their livelihoods. In our era, we see similar anxieties about automation, artificial intelligence, and globalization. More efficient producers from entering markets, you don't stop innovation, you just shift it to other countries or other industries. You preserve some jobs in declining sectors at the cost of preventing even more job creation in emerging sectors. The economy becomes less dynamic, less productive, and ultimately less able to compete globally. But that doesn't mean society should simply accept the human costs of creative destruction as inevitable. There are policy tools available to help smooth transitions. Education and retraining programs can help workers develop new skills. Unemployment insurance and social safety nets can provide temporary support during transitions. Regional development policies can help diversify local economies so they're not dependent on single industries. These interventions don't stop creative destruction, but they can help people navigate it more successfully. Looking at the long sweep of history, it's clear that creative destruction has dramatically improved human welfare. People today live longer, healthier, more prosperous lives than their ancestors. They have access to goods, services, education, entertainment, and opportunities that previous generations couldn't even imagine. The average person in a developed country today enjoys luxuries that kings and emperors of previous eras could not access. But this progress came through constant disruptive change. It came through the destruction of traditional ways of life, the obsolescence of old skills, the collapse of established industries, and the transformation of entire societies. Understanding this process, understanding these innovation patterns, gives us a framework for thinking about the changes happening right now and the changes that will come in the future. As we face the current wave of AI and automation, we should expect similar patterns. There will be tremendous new opportunities. Entire new industries will emerge. Many jobs will be destroyed, but even more will be created, though they'll require different skills and often emerge in unexpected places. Some companies will become extraordinarily successful. Others, including many that seem unshakable today, will fail to adapt and will decline. Society will grapple with difficult questions about inequality, displacement, and how to share the benefits of technological progress. The key insight from studying innovation patterns is this: change is not an aberration. It's not something that happens occasionally and then returns to normal. Change, disruptive change, is the normal state of capitalism. It's what drives progress. Companies, workers, and societies that understand this and prepare for it will fare better than those who expect stability and are shocked when the world transforms around them. Joseph Schumpeter saw all of this clearly 100 years ago. The waves keep coming, each one faster and more powerful than the last. We're surfing on one right now, and we can already see the next one building on the horizon. Understanding the patterns doesn't make the experience less turbulent, but it helps us anticipate what's coming and position ourselves to ride the wave rather than be swept away by it. That's the story of innovation patterns and creative destruction, not a tale of steady progress, but of constant revolution, where the future belongs not to those who defend the present, but to those who are brave enough to build something new, even knowing that their creation will one day be destroyed by the next wave of innovation. It's the